Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is True Wonder Dog and I'm here today with the beginner's guide for Tira. Now this character is very wacky and comes with a ton of versatility, so there's a bunch of different ways you can play her. So for this guide specifically, I'm going to go over what worked best for me when I was playing her online. And I'm also going to take into account the styles I've seen from tournament players as well. Now alright, so without any further ado, let's get started. Now one of the most unique things about Tira are her two different stances, and these two stances are Jolly and Gloomy. So right now I'm currently in Jolly, and if I do certain attacks, I'm now in Gloomy. Now the tricky thing about these two stances is you're not always in control of when they happen. Not only do you need certain attacks to switch between the two, but it's a bit random, it's not always going to work. And on top of that, the opponent can actually hit you and knock you into a different stance, which can be very confusing when you first start playing this character. So with all that in mind, I wanted to talk about her universal attacks. That way if you keep switching back and forth, you have some tried and true attacks to fall back on. So first up, we have her AA and her BB. Now keep in mind the third part of each string does actually change depending on her personality, but the first two are pretty consistent. Both AA and BB are pretty standard. If the opponent's trying to sidestep, AA. If they start ducking, BB. And then if the opponent won't stop pressuring you, you of course have 2A. Not only is this fast and will hit them sidestepping, but it also puts you in a crouching state, which leads into her wall rising attacks, which is good because most of these are also universal. So you have wall rising A, pretty good horizontal and hits mid. You have wall rising B, which is of course the most important because it crumples the opponent, and if you press kick afterwards, you're sent flying sky high and you have a few follow-ups from there. So if all you care about is damage, then you want to do B again. So you do wall rising B, K, and then B. And this also switches sides and you have multiple options from there as well. But those are more stance specific, so I don't want to cover those until later on. Now, if you don't just want damage and want to go for a setup, you can actually do kick on the way down. So wall rising B, kick, and then kick again. This knocks the opponent on the floor and you can do certain attacks on their wake up. You can go for mids, lows, big horizontals, all that good stuff. So if you're less interested in damage, you can use kick on the way down to go for a setup. And of course you can also do A on the way down if you so choose. Now I don't recommend it most of the time, although as you saw just then, it does have a chance to switch your personalities. And it's also a big horizontal. So if you end up whiffing this move on the way down, you can try to catch the opponent if they sidestep. So it's also good for that. Now, oddly enough, the wall rising kick actually does change depending on your stance. If you're in the Jolly stance, it's just a fast mid attack with some pretty good range, and then if you're in the Gloomy stance, it's actually the second part of her wall rising. So you can just go straight into it, and that can be pretty useful because this attack does have some high crush properties to it. If the opponent's doing too many highs, it can actually go underneath it, and you can just skip to your follow-ups. And one more set of attacks that do not change based on your stance are her jumping attacks. So jumping A is still the same, so horizontal. Jumping kick is still a fantastic counter hit setup. And even if you don't get the counter hit, you're still facing away, and you have some pretty good options from there. Once again, those are personality specific, so I'll cover those a bit later on. A pretty tried and true method though is B+K. If you're in the Jolly state, you can do B again, and it's a pretty good little combo starter, and the second hit on counter hit will actually launch the opponent for a full combo. That's pretty good. And if you're in Gloomy, it's not quite the same, but it's still a very fast attack, so boom, and it has an auto guard impact on it. So not only is it a fast combo starter, but it can also parry the opponent's attacks as well. So B+K when your back is turned is a very solid option. And last but not least for the jumping attacks, we have jumping B. If this attack lands at all, you get a very cinematic attack that does pretty good damage too. And it doesn't require a counter hit, so if the opponent's going for a low and you know they are, this can be a fantastic way to punish them for it. It leads to a lot of damage and it's very cinematic too. Just an all-around cool looking attack. And I almost forgot to mention her jumping B+K. So these are all the same move, but they have different distances. So if I was to do 8 B+K, that's straight up, it gets a little bit of distance forward, but nothing too crazy. If I do 9 B+K, it's much further forward, so it's much better for closing in on the opponent. I actually love to use this to do attacks on the way down against characters with a ton of range like Nightmare or Seong Mina or Siegfried. This can be a risky but efficient way of getting in on the opponent. Just keep in mind if the opponent's more patient, they can see you coming and counter you on the way down. But if they're trying to fight you off from a distance with some really far-ranged normals, then doing up B+K can be a great way to get in. Now if you do 7 B+K, that would be up+back B+K, it's the shortest of the three hops, it's almost completely straight up. This is the option you want to do if you're close to the opponent and don't want to risk missing them. Of course, if they're right in front of you, it's going to miss no matter what, so I don't use this option very often. I typically do 9B+K or 8B+K depending on how far the opponent is away from me. But just keep in mind you do have 3 different options available. And thankfully, most of Tira's kicks are also universal as well. So for starters, you have 6K, which has pretty good range, and it's a high attack. However, I actually prefer 3K because it has even better range, and she flips forward a bit so it can dodge certain attacks. I find this to be better if you're trying to poke the opponent from a distance. And of course you also have 2K, which is a fast low attack, very tried and true, and that also puts you in a crouching state, so you have access to all your different roll rising attacks from here, which is always nice. And of course you also have the headbutt. However, this attack does behave differently depending on her stance. So during Jolly, it staggers the opponent, but you can't really follow up after it. It can still be good in certain situations, so right then I did 1K, and then I used the headbutt to extend the combo, and it also switched me to Gloomy. That's the main reason you want to use the headbutt when you're in the Jolly state. Now once you're in Gloomy, the headbutt just becomes combo extension city. It's your go-to way to extend combos most of the time. So while this move does serve different functions depending on your stance, it's still available in both, so don't forget about it because it's very fast. And even though 1K does actually change depending on your stance, they're both low hitting attacks. Now in Jolly, it leads to a short combo afterwards, so I did 4K there with the headbutt, which also has a chance to change my personality. Now if I'm in Gloomy, it's still a low. It's just a little bit faster, but it doesn't go under high attacks, so that's the weakness here, right? You can't actually dodge moves this way, but it is a little bit quicker. And there's 2 more moves I want to mention that are universal. So first up we have a string. This is 4B+K, then B. This attack does a ton of damage and can also be extended in both stances. Now the manner in which you finish the combo is different depending on your stance, but it's always a great combo starter. And if you're near a wall, this can be one of the most damaging ways to extend combos. And last but certainly not least, we have 1A. This is a very far-reaching low attack that's available in both stances. It's a fantastic tool after a combo when you're left a bit further away. You can use this move to get back in and score a cheap hit on your opponent's shins. Now keep in mind it is a low attack, so if the opponent does block this, then it's their turn to attack you. So don't throw it out all the time, but just keep it in mind as an option. It's a fantastic way to get in and hit your opponent low for some good damage. And on counter hit, I believe it knocks the opponent down. Let's go ahead and see. Yes, it does. And that of course leads to a short follow-up. Alright, and that's about it for her universal attacks, so now let's talk about her different stances. First off, I want to talk about Jolly, because Jolly is the stance that a lot of people don't really appreciate. They want to switch to Gloomy right away because it has all the combos, but they neglect how good Jolly is at spacing, and how good it is for mix-up setups as well. I think Jolly is actually my favorite stance, in fact. So first off, let's talk about spacing. If you're a bit further away from the opponent, then you have 6B. This is a pretty fast hitting mid and it covers a large portion of the screen, so it's great for getting in, and it also has 2 follow-ups as well. So first up you can press B again. It's a bit slower of a follow-up, but it is a mid and does pretty good damage, and since she hops off the ground, it can even avoid faster attacks like 2A, so it's great for that. Now if the opponent tries to attack with something else, like say a standing A attack, or a standing B that's a bit faster, it will actually interrupt the B follow-up. So if the opponent starts doing that, then you can do K instead. This option is much faster and can counter hit the opponent, so it's a great option if the opponent likes to press buttons, and if you're near the wall, it can actually splat to extend combos for a bit more damage. So both options certainly have their uses. Now if the opponent does start sidestepping, then you can do 6-6-AA. Both are very good horizontal attacks and they hit mid, and notice how Tira ducks low to the ground. This actually allows you to beat certain high attacks as well, so it's fantastic for getting in. And Tira also has a sneaky low for getting in, which is quarter circle forward, then a kick, so I believe that's 2-3-6 with the number pad notations. This attack has deceptively good range, although it's a bit slow on startup, so the opponent does have time to react to it, but since she gets so low to the ground, it can be a good way to avoid certain high attacks. So even though this move is very situational, it definitely does have its uses. And then if you want to whiff punish the opponent, you have 6-6-B. This is a big mid that's great for starting off combos, and there are several ways to follow it up. A very easy way to follow it up is just 6-6-AA. It's not the most damaging follow-up, but it is pretty tried and true, especially if you land this move at max distance. It can be a decent follow-up in that situation, but if you want damage, then you want to do 4-4-BA, which looks like this. Now I have seen this move whiff when I was playing online, and I'm not sure why. Sometimes I was even right in the opponent's face and it still didn't work. So there does seem to be some odd circumstances where it doesn't combo, but if it does hit, it's the most damaging follow-up in my experience. And next up, we have one of my favorite attacks from the Jolly stance, and this is 6AB. This attack hits high, but it does catch sidesteppers, so it's great for that, and it also scoots her forward. But what makes this attack especially good, in my opinion, is the second hit is a low that puts you in a crouching state. So from there, you can obviously do a wall rising attack. And that wall rising B follow-up works a lot more often than you might think, and since the kick follow-up also has high crush properties, it works even better. However, if the opponent does start doing fast attacks after this setup, then you can just do 2A while crouching, and that will keep you safe while also interrupting any attacks your opponent does. It's not quite as flashy, but it's a good option. And next up we have my favorite move in Jolly stance that I call the blender, and it starts off with 4B, and after this you have several follow-ups, so if you do B again, it's just a mid attack. Nothing special, but it will catch the opponent trying to interrupt this string. Now once they start respecting you, you can do A as the follow-up. And this hits high and then low, so it's a sneaky little mix-up built in. Now since that first part is high, the opponent can duck under it, and that's why you want to do the B follow-up every now and then. But the mix-ups don't stop there. Once you get the opponent to block the A follow-up, you have two more options. If you press kick, it's a sneaky low attack. Now the thing is, it has very long startup, so the opponent has all day to interrupt it. So you don't want to use this option unless the opponent's always blocking and they're very respectful and not pressing any buttons. Now if the opponent does start pressing buttons, that's when you have the fun B follow-up at the end. This will catch the opponent pressing any buttons, and it leads to a very flashy and damaging follow-up. And if you do manage to land this follow-up, you'll be a bit further from the opponent, at which point I recommend going for 3AB, which is a good low horizontal that leads into a mid. Pretty good way to sneak in some extra damage. Although you can also do 1A as well, because that has slightly better range, and it's also a sneaky low. And on counter hit it knocks down, which allows for a little follow-up. And Tira also gets 2 auto GI attacks during her Jolly personality. So first up you have A+B. This will beat high and mid horizontal attacks, which is good because it's very slow, which unfortunately makes it very bad at countering reversal edge. So if your opponent ever does go for reversal edge, you just want to sidestep most of the time because her A+B is very slow. And then she also has 2 A+B, which actually hits low and has fantastic range. In fact, this can be a good way to end combos in certain situations. And it also has an auto guard impact as well. This one beats high and mid vertical attacks. So if you have a good idea for how your opponent plays, you can now counter both their horizontal and vertical attacks. And that's pretty much it for what makes Jolly good in my experience, although please post down in the comments if there are any other great things about Jolly, because once again Tira is a very complicated character and I am likely to miss something. So next let's talk about her Gloomy stance. This is her big damage stance, which is why people love it so much. It has some very flashy combos that deal a lot of damage. So with that in mind, let's talk about the best way to start off combos in this stance. So first up we have the tried and true 3B. This is a great standard launcher, and after landing it you do 4A, 4K, then 6B. Pretty good damage, nothing to sneeze at, right? 71 damage, pretty dang good stuff off a basic launcher. And then if you're a bit further away from the opponent, you have 2A+B. This attack crumples the opponent, which of course you can get a bit more damage afterwards. In fact, I should have done 6B there. So that's a pretty good way to get some damage as well. And then on counter hit, this move is actually a combo starter. And you can end the combo the exact same way as before. Just keep in mind the headbutt extender does have a chance to switch your stances, so be wary of that, you might accidentally end up in Jolly. And one last great combo starter from the Gloomy stance is her 4BBB. Now this does require exact timing to get the combo started, but once you do manage to nail the timing, it leads to some of her most damaging combos. And to be completely honest, the timing isn't that difficult, so once you do get the timing down, it leads to some really damaging combos. I mean, look at that, 81 damage? That's practically a super, which does 90 damage. And that was just off a simple launcher, it didn't even require counter hit, so that's some pretty crazy stuff. But it's not all about combos when in the Gloomy state, this attack also has some pretty good mix-ups. So for example, you have 4-4B. This is a pretty sneaky mid attack, and you can actually charge it too. And if you charge it, it does a very chunky amount of damage. Now the opponent of course does have time to hit you out of it, and you can only combo into it after very specific combos, but it's still a very damaging option to keep in mind, and since Tira does go to the ground, she can actually duck under high attacks as well, which makes it a high crushing mid, which is very rare in this game. And then you have what I call her hula hoop of death. So this is 3AA, and it has some pretty good damage, and the follow-ups do decent damage as well. Now it's not a true combo unless that first hit is a counter hit, but it's still a fantastic option to keep in mind, especially since the range is better than it looks. It's pretty good. Now if you're very far away from the opponent, she has options as well. So first off, she has 6B. Pretty tried and true, very good range, and it crumples the opponent so you can go for some pressure afterwards. It doesn't start combos, but it does give you frame advantage. And a very similar move to that is 6AB. So it's a horizontal into that big mid. And it's not a true string unless the first is counter hit, but it's just awesome that you have that tool for catching the opponent trying to sidestep, then you have the big mid which gives you frame advantage. But what about whiff punishing? What do you do if you're a bit further away from the opponent and they stick out a move? Well, in that case you have 6-6-AK, which is pretty fantastic. It's 2 mids back to back, and if the first hit is counter hit, then it's a true string. And since it knocks the opponent down, you can go for more pressure afterwards. And one other good whiff punish is 6-6B. This attack is also fantastic for ending most of your combos. Now as far as whiff punishing goes, it's not very flashy and doesn't lead to very much damage, but it does have some pretty good range on it, especially in front of Tira. So it is good for that. Alright, so we've covered the main attacks for each stance, so now let's talk about how to switch between them. And thankfully there are some universal ways to switch no matter which stance you're in. So for starters, Tira can just bonk her head with B+K. And that actually has a guard impact on it which will catch all high and mid attacks with the exception of kicks. So no kicks, but it still covers high attacks and mids, so that's a pretty wide range of attacks if you do manage to get it. And if the guard impact does connect, she gets a quick headbutt follow-up. It doesn't lead to any combos, but it does do some damage and staggers the opponent. And if the first bonk doesn't switch personalities, you can actually press K 2 more times for a total of 3 bonks. And chances are one of those bonks is going to switch your personality. Now keep in mind these headbutts do actually damage your health bar. Only a little bit, but just keep in mind you do take damage from doing this. Not to mention you do kind of leave yourself open, so I don't recommend going for additional bonks unless you're very far from the opponent, which can happen sometimes, so if you're all the way out here, feel free to go for a couple of bonks and see if it switches your personality. But let's say the opponent's really hammering down on you, they're just keeping up the pressure, doing a bunch of really long strings, and you want to escape that, make them hurt for it, and also switch personalities in return. So the way you actually do that is 2B+K. Now the parry window is quite big, but it takes a while for it to actually activate, which is why you typically want to do it if the opponent's going for a lot of long strings, because if the opponent just does 1 or 2 attacks, they might have time to block before the follow-up happens, but if they do a long string, then this move is almost guaranteed to hit. So if your opponent's ever really laying on the pressure, then 2B+K can be a good option. And unfortunately, that's about it for the universal methods for switching stances. So now let's talk about the different switches that are based on which state she's currently in. So for example, if I'm in Jolly, then I have certain methods for going into Gloomy. Although your options definitely are more limited during Jolly. So first up, you can actually bonk your head after her 3A-B string. So you can do B+K there. And just like before, you can actually keep pressing K and keep bonking your head. And even though I did 3 bonks there, I still didn't quite get the change, so it's not guaranteed, it's a bit random. And then your only other option to transition during Jolly is actually only available during her soul charge, and that's her 6-6-B-B. And even this one's not guaranteed, so yep, didn't happen. And that's honestly the only 2 unique transitions for Jolly. Everything else is universal if you want to get to Gloomy. Now oddly enough, if you're in the Gloomy stance, it's much easier to get back into Jolly. So the first of which, instead of doing 6-6-B, you can do 6-6-A+B, which does more damage and has a high chance to actually switch. So not only do you get to switch, but you also get more damage to end your combos. So it's kind of a win-win if you prefer the Jolly state. And it's the same case for her next string as well. So normally you have 3AA. And that's pretty decent damage, but you could do 3A+B. That does more damage and has a chance to transition you back into Jolly. So next up, let's talk about Soul Charge. So first let's start off with Jolly. So she actually gets a new combo starter and it's off one of her best strings. So we have 6A-B-B. And now she can do more stuff after that. She could do B+K-B for example, and get a short combo going. And that was already a really great string. I already talked about how great 6A-B is, and now it's just that much better. And as we also mentioned earlier, her 6-6-B-B is now possible. So one of her best whiff punishing moves can now extend combos for even more damage, so that's awesome. And this move also has a chance to switch your personalities. And that's not her only whiff punishing move that got better, so 6-6-AA now has a third follow-up. Press A a third time, and you get that follow-up, which is great for extending combos if you're near the wall. And last but not least, her crazy low attack gets better as well. So her 2-3-6-K now has better range, does more damage, and knocks the opponent down. And to make things even better, it also has a chance to switch her personalities. And that's about it for her jolly stuff, so let's talk about what Soul Charge does to Gloomy. So remember her 6B attack? It now has a follow-up. Press B again. And that has guard break properties, so the opponent cannot use Versal Edge or guard impact here, it will beat it. And one more move to get a guard break is her AKA, which is already a good string, but now it has an extra hit, does more damage, and has that guard break at the end, so once again it will beat guard impact and reversal edge. And one more buff she gets that's a bit odd, though I'm glad she has it, is she now has a 4-hitting B string. So you just do B, 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 which has a chance to actually switch your personalities, and it's very similar to her 6B B string. In fact, it's almost identical, so it's great if your opponent's pressing a lot of buttons, and it also has a chance to switch your personalities. However, Tira also gets buffed to her combos as well. So 3B was already a great combo starter, but now she can do 3BB. And that's actually a guaranteed starter, it doesn't need a counter hit to get that second hit, and it launches the opponent very high. And to make things even better, Tira can also combo after a low now as well, though it does require a counter hit, but it's still very good. So 1B now has a follow-up by pressing B again, which sends the opponent behind you, which of course can be followed up with other stuff. Now it does have a chance to switch your personalities, which is a bit of a shame since the follow-ups you get in Gloomy after that are much better than what you get in Jolly, but it is still one extra way to switch stances if you want to. And her 6/6 A+B also gets better as well. We mentioned before this has a chance to actually switch her personalities, but even so, this move can now extend combos as opposed to just starting them. So even if you're mid-combo, this move can relaunch the opponent for a bit extra damage. And last but not least, Gloomy also gets a command grab, because why not? And it's real easy too, it's just forward and throw. And this is pretty much guaranteed to switch your personalities as well. It does some pretty dang good damage, it's the exact same as your parry animation, but it doesn't require the opponent to hit you. It's just forward and throw during Gloomy state. So it's awesome that you have that as an option. And that's about it for her Soul Charge stuff, so let's talk about her critical edge next. Now it's a pretty standard critical edge, it's a vertical, but it's got decent range and it's fairly fast. However, it has a little catch to it. So notice it switched my stance, which is good, because during the Gloomy stance it actually does more damage. So if you ever want to do a super combo, make sure you're in Gloomy first, that way you get the maximum damage possible. Alright everyone, that concludes this beginner's guide for Tira. Thanks so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, then please leave a like down below. It really does help my channel out a lot. And while you're down there, please post a comment and request which character you want a guide for next. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and ring that bell. That way you never miss a future video. Make sure to come back next time, and as always, stay underdogs.